welcome to Two Profs in a Pod. This is Tanisha Baca, Communication Professor at GCC.
And I'm Beth Ayers, Composition and Literature Professor at GCC.
We both hold faculty developer roles on our campus here at GCC in Arizona. And today, we are going to talk about culturally responsive teaching.
And we have a special guest with us today, Karen Bird, English instructor at Glendale Community College. We have asked her to be with us today because we know she is well aware of culturally responsive teaching. She practices it, and she's also shared with our campus before about her practice. So we thought it would help our audience if we had someone like Karen with us today. So Karen, will you tell us just a little bit about maybe how you came to culturally responsive teaching and what makes you a little bit qualified to talk about culturally responsive teaching?
Excellent. So hi, I'm Karen. So I started my teaching career over a decade ago in the high school setting, and I taught in a very affluent, very homogenized kind of setting for 3 years. And after 3 years, I left that school and went and taught at an alternative school where the majority of my students were low-income boys of color, which is true for most alternative settings in the way that we currently have education. And so it was in the 3 years I spent at that school that I really learned differentiation. It's where I really learned how much where someone is coming from affects how they're going to learn in the classroom. And so that's kind of where I started my thinking process about this with like the Ruby Payne model and looking at how honestly poverty affects students, and then that led into cultural differences. And then coming to GCC, I've had a lot of fun in like kind of getting to know our student population and the diversity that exists here. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, it does. One of the things that we always talk about at the beginning of our episode too is, why did we choose to talk about this particular topic? And so in our last podcast, culturally responsive teaching came up just very briefly.
Yes.
And so it seemed like a natural progression to kind of talk about it today. But also, just based on our campus, it would be a disservice to our students if we weren't talking about culturally responsive teaching, because we do have so much diversity on our campus. And I don't have all of the facts of diversity here, but I will share the little bit that I do have. Which is, we almost 60% of our population is minority students, and 60% are 20 years or older, and 62% are first-gen students, which,
wow,
that's huge.
It's really high.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I looked up some national data, too, and the national data also addressed all those same topics, and we're higher than the national data on all of those. So nationally, a third of community college students are first gen, so we're double that. We're a lot more than that. Women are in the majority at both GCC and nationally by a little bit. I don't think we beat national statistics in that one, but we're close. And the Hispanic population in community colleges continues to increase, and the white population is actually decreasing a little bit. These statistics come from the Department of Education through 2016.
So they're pretty legit.
Yeah. So demographics are changing nationally,
they are.
but then also at GCC, it's kind of our duty to address this because our students demand it. In my opinion, our students demand it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like we do definitely have a responsibility in communication. When we teach public speaking, one of the first questions I tell my students is you always have to consider who is your audience, right? Because who your audience is going to really indicate and dictate how you're going to do your presentation. So I think it's the same thing can definitely apply to the classroom, especially with the numbers that we see on our level and also the national level. So what does the research say? You're probably wondering what is culturally responsive teaching?
That's a good point.
What is it, right?
Yet.
What is culturally responsive teaching, or what I'll reference as really CRT? CRT, the focus is really teaching with an understanding of really the cultural makeup of your students, whatever that may be, and really creating a curriculum that really kind of focuses on who they are, where they come from, and also the different cultures that are represented in the classroom. So it's really kind of focusing on the student. I feel like it's really student-centered. And some of the information that I found on the research when it talks about why this information is important, one of the things that we often hear about is the achievement gap and how there's a gap between white and minority students. And I found some information from the Encyclopedia of Diversity and Social Justice that was posted in 2014. And it's an entry that talked about culturally responsive teaching. And it talked about how some believe that a contributing factor to the achievement gap is actually the lack of multicultural content in the classroom. And in the entry, they state that the education system has an approach where all learning techniques are applied to any student and teachers teach from a cultural place most representative to them. The entry continues by saying that this is problematic in low-performing schools with high minority populations. CRT, also known as culturally responsive teaching, focuses on teachers teaching with an understanding of the cultural makeup of their students and, like I said before, creating curriculum that resonates with the cultures represented in the classroom. So it's really focusing on who your students are, but it could also help in dealing with the achievement gap that we see between white and minority students because we're focusing on the content, so the student and also the content, and making sure the content is representative of the students. So that's some of the research that I found. So is there anything else that we kind of have to say about
Well, I'm just going to
CRT?
say that it makes sense that it could work to help in the achievement gap, mainly because, well, probably a lot of different ways, but what it makes me think of is that we make our students feel like they belong.
Yes.
and deserve to be in an academic setting. And that right there is going to help, I think, improve their achievement when they feel comfortable. And this is a spot where, I'm supposed to be.
Right.
Well, that's really important, I think, especially here at GCC with our large number of first-generation students. They don't necessarily have that cultural capital coming from home to say what office hours are, or that teachers are not, that professors, instructors are not going to be in the classroom when class isn't taking place. And teaching our students some of those soft skills as well, I think, is also encompassed in this because of the fact that they don't have that, familial history of experience.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I know that some of us on campus engaged in some research over the last year regarding how to help our online students be more successful. And I know that one of the emails I sent out to a higher achieving group of students, I said something in it like, you guys are doing really well and you're good at this college thing. Like, you're doing everything you should do to be successful. And a student responded to that no one had ever told him or her that they were good at this.
Well, that's the thing. Sometimes I think when we talk about teaching practice or things like CRT, we are often thinking in terms of the achievement gap being our low performing students. And sometimes, culturally responsive teaching is for our high performers, our low performers. It's for everybody.
Right.
And we don't always give that sort of acknowledgement, praise, or information to our high achieving students because we assume they know what they're doing.
Right. And I don't know any more about that student, but yeah, you're right. The first gen students could be highly successful and need to hear that message the same.
We have to differentiate for our high achievers the same way we differentiate to bring our lower achievers up.
So I'd like to take a moment to bring it really back to the entry that I referenced earlier that talked about culturally responsive teaching and how they cited Latson and Billings from 1994 and how they stated that there are three components of culturally relevant teaching. First one is the teacher's conceptions of themselves and others. The second one, the manner in which classroom social interactions are structured. And third, teachers' conception of knowledge, and how all of these components are important to culturally relevant teaching, right? Especially, I think, the piece about teachers' conceptions of themselves and others. I think if you are just really just teaching from your perspective, right? Or maybe teaching kind of like a mirror image of yourself, I think is the best way I can describe it. So if you're an Asian teacher or a Hispanic teacher and you're teaching from that self, right? So maybe, which there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe it comes across as maybe kind of missing the cultural component of the classroom, right? There could be so many different perspectives that you could bring into the classroom besides your own. I think it's very, very important in CRT to kind of diversify that in the classroom to meet the population. So I thought that was really interesting, the point that the encyclopedia made as far as just some of the components of CRT.
Okay. And then what do we say?
So what do we say, Beth? I think you have some things to say. What do we say here?
I think there are some maybe common misunderstandings, at least maybe for people who've been teaching around as long as I have, when multiculturalism was sort of the trend, where we're going to diversify the literature that we're teaching in our classes. And, that's not really what we're talking about when we talk about culturally responsive teaching. That's something different. It doesn't go as far, I don't think. So just to kind of be clear on that. And then, as we talked about at the beginning, I think not including those experiences and voices of students and their experiences and values is a disservice to them, and so not allowing them to share or be part of the learning process or be part of that classroom is I think just further isolating students who might already feel isolated,
right,
a little bit. And then Karen and I were talking about earlier before we started recording that CRT can really give students a place in academia, period. Like, it makes them feel like they belong,
right,
potentially.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about my interest in this really comes from a place of it's almost like radical teaching, because for so long the academy and academia and school has been exclusive, and it's been for, the financially elite, and for many, many years men only, and all these different like exclusionary practices. And CRT really helps to kind of dismantle some of that and create a space for all students, and those who are kind of newer to the party, not really new, but
right.
newer to pedagogy in terms of changing the way that we teach and the way that we learn. I think it's an important practice that kind of brings in student voices.
So one of the things we always talk about in our episodes is how to get done whatever it is that we're talking about.
Yes.
So I think what we're going to do is ask Karen to share, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 practices that she recommends for teachers to sort of get into culturally responsive teaching, or to start practicing it, or maybe up their game because they're already doing something and maybe they need to just, give it a boost. So
Yeah.
what do you think, Karen?
Well, I think one of the first things that we have to recognize as instructors is that culture is central to student learning, and where our students are coming from is going to affect the way that they learn. And so it's important to recognize that, embrace that, and try to learn about that. It's not about coming into a classroom and being like, well, I have a large population of X students, and X students, are known to be A, B, and C.
Right.
That was an awkward way of saying all of that. But
Right.
not making assumptions about our students, I think, is a big difference between, say, like that multicultural, bend and actual culturally responsive teaching. That responsive piece is important. It's dynamic. So taking the time to recognize that culture is central to student learning, and that it will help motivate students, because you're going to get to know them in a different way. And so one of the ways that I try to do that in my own practice is I try to get to know student names as soon as possible, and I make sure that I learn how to say their names correctly.
Right.
And, a lot of times your students, especially ones that have names that are maybe, difficult for folks to say, be like, no, it's fine. You can just call me, this. And it's like, no, I want to call you your name.
Right.
I want to say your name correctly.
Right.
And I mean, my name's Karen, but it's spelled all sorts of funny. And so my whole life when people read it, Tanisha, I'm sure you've had maybe folks read your name funny because of the spelling. I don't know. I'm making assumptions there.
Yeah.
But I want my name said correctly. And so I want
Right.
them to recognize that they have a right to demand that be taken seriously. So it's little things like that. And so I use name cards for the whole semester for myself to learn them quickly, and then for them to learn each other's names, because that's another component, is creating a learning community. Let's see, what else? I think it's really important when we start to think about CRT that we think about communicating high expectations for all of our students and not making assumptions about our students based on their background that they won't be able to achieve. All students want to be held to a high standard,
Right.
and it's our job. You know, the competencies kind of help guide that, but even so, we want to make sure that we are recognizing learning styles, but also still saying, but you will be able to do these things by the end of the semester. That student-centered instruction, I think, is really the largest piece, and that's something that we talk about across the board in pedagogy. You know, we talk about student-centered learning, and this is just another way of putting the student at the center of learning, including students' interests in the curriculum when you can, changing the curriculum itself to reflect the students in the classroom, not reflect a diversity of students, but reflect the students that are actually in the room right there. And so allowing for choice, it's just another way of differentiating instruction, really, is allowing choice, allowing students to be a part of the design and development of, you know, what we're using to learn.
Right.
I think is kind of an interesting piece of that. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Awesome.
Maybe I probably have a lot more to say, but
No, that's very helpful.
I could talk forever.
What would you say? What's one tip you would give to a teacher who they feel like maybe they're already addressing or they're already practicing some culturally responsive teaching, but they want to boost? One tip for them. Is that question too hard?
No, it's not too hard. It's just
Okay.
going to throw me under the bus. So
I'm sorry.
No, I talked about my interest in culturally responsive teaching starting a long time ago, and it did in practice, but not in theory. It wasn't until you came to my office, Beth, and said, "Hey, Karen, I think you're doing some of these things. Will you present on these?"
Okay.
And I was like, Psh, I don't know what you're talking about. And then you handed me some resources, and I started looking into it, and I realized that my teaching practice was already doing a lot of these things.
Right.
I just didn't have a name for it. And so I think the biggest thing is if you think you're already engaging in culturally responsive teaching, then getting some of that, you know, theoretical background and really kind
Okay.
of delving in, I think, is probably a good starting place, because it also has shifted and changed things that I was already doing well, but really, or not well, I don't want to say that I'm perfect, but has really given me pause for why do I include this piece instead of this piece, and
Sure.
and what things can I do to increase, you know, my response to my students.
Okay.
So it kind of like informs your practice a little bit more.
Yeah,
it's like
it-
you
a better
naturally
theoretical
already
background.
doing these things, but now you have something that kind of explains the why you do it and how to do it. That kind of helps in that sense.
Well, absolutely, because like I said, you know, this is another way of student-centered, you know, teaching is something that we're already talking about in many realms, and this is a different way of looking at how to center the student. So learning about culturally responsive teaching helps you center your student in another way. That's not
Right.
just based on their interest level, but also on their background, like where they're coming from, knowing the things about whether they're a first-generation student or not. And it's not about prying into their personal life, but it's about, you know, getting an idea of who they are.
Right.
And in terms of like differentiated instruction, oftentimes we talk about differentiating instruction, you know, for learning styles or for learning abilities or for, you know, skill development, but that differentiation could apply to, you know, students' cultural backgrounds.
And I think this is great because of the fact that I feel that this style of teaching just adds another layer to student-centered, you know, teaching and learning. And I think it just adds more depth to what we're doing. I think we focus on breadth, right? Like, what is your learning style? What is your name? What is your major? Do you have a dog? Do you have a cat? Like, we might learn that personal information, and that's for me, I think more surface information. But when you take it to, I feel like the core of a student's being, which is culture. I think that culture is a huge part of our core, and that goes into self-concept. And I'm getting very teachy, but culture is a part of our core. So I think that adds a lot more depth to our teaching, because we are speaking to who the students are as individuals and where they're coming from, and how culture is a huge part of who we are and our center for being, you might say. And the fact that you have an instructor who took the time to take you into consideration past what your name is, right? Mm-hmm. I think it really screams a lot. I feel like as a student, I don't know, I would feel maybe the value, like this teacher cares and they've taken the time, and, it makes me feel that, who I am and my background matters. It's not just, they just learned my name and we're just going through the content and that's it. It's kind of like one of those things where, okay, well, we're learning about, how to carry a conversation in communication, or maybe we're learning about some other concepts, but then you add that other layer of culture, which I think is really, really great.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to throw one more thing out there, which I don't think is culturally responsive teaching, which is having a student in class be the sole representative of their culture and asking
Yes.
them.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So it's okay that I said that.
Yes.
And having them, explain on behalf of everybody in
Yes,
their culture,
they are not
whatever it is that the rest of us don't get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not fair to ask the oppressed to teach,
They're not the spokesperson.
Right.
Yeah, and it's less about them sharing their background with the class and more about you responding to their needs in the classroom for their learning.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, but that's a great point. I forgot what I was gonna.
Do we want to move over to what's on the radar?
Sure, we could talk about what's on the radar. Do you want to start with what's on your radar?
I have a couple things on my radar. One is the 2018 Pod Network Conference. That should be on your radar too, Tanisha.
Yes, it is. It's on my calendar. Yes, Pod.
Okay, so that's in November in Portland.
Yes, in Portland. So excited.
You guys can Google that and look up more information about it. But the theme is leading in times of change. And so we're super excited about that. I have a road trip coming up too, and I've been indulging in the Audible sales, and so I've got several books that I'm going to be listening to, one of which was a National Book Award finalist called Never Caught, which is a book about Ona Judge. I hope I'm saying that right. A slave owned by George Washington, and it's about her escape and their pursuit. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And then also I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which I think a lot of people are reading and familiar with, because that's the book that Michelle McNamara was writing and almost finished, but then passed away suddenly and at a young age. But this was her book about her quest to find the Golden State Killer. And I think I heard in the news too that somebody had been arrested.
Yeah,
for those crimes.
They used like ancestry DNA, kind of like DNA to like link and find, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm excited to read that. So that's kind of what's on my radar.
What's on my radar? I had to take a moment to look up some things. I'm so sorry. I was trying to remember because there's a blank spot right here, so Tanisha had to think of it. So things on my radar. I finished Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, and it was awesome. It is definitely Black Panther with magic. That's the best way to really describe it. The story was great. The characters are great. I was just engaged the whole time. It's really complex. It had some really interesting themes that I really, really liked about the book. So yes, I love it. I highly recommend Children of Blood and Bone. I'm also excited. I saw the trailer for The Hate You Give, which is another book I read, I believe by Angie Thomas. That is on my radar. I'm so excited for it. I can't wait for that to come out. So that is definitely on my radar. Another thing that's on my radar, I ordered Robot Proof. I ordered this book called Robot Proof, so I'm waiting for it. It's supposed to be shipping to my house today from Amazon, so I'm hoping I get that soon. The book I'm currently reading, I finished Children of Blood and Bone, so I'm currently reading this book called Mastery by Robert Greene. I really, really enjoy it. It's all about, I guess, how to become a master in whatever it is that you do. It's kind of something that's kind of been a bit of a point of focus for me lately. I've mentioned in earlier podcasts the 10,000 hours by with Malcolm Gladwell and how you can become a master in 10,000 hours. So I'm on this personal quest to become a master teacher and also to help others become master teachers as well. So I'm hoping this book will definitely give me some helpful information, not only for myself, but also to share with other people as well. And another book that I'm reading is Coraline. I know I'm behind the times. I know it's by Neil Gaiman. But I started that book as well. So it's just a lot of reading is what I've been doing.
Good for you. Karen, what's on your radar?
I also am going to start reading Robot Proof. I've already supposed to have been reading it, but I'm a little behind. A lot of catching up to do. But I bought at the beginning of summer, and again, have not cracked it open yet, a book by Steven Pinker. And it's called, what is it called? The Sense of Style. And so it's a book about kind of changing the way in which we look at writing style guides. So instead of, the old elements of style, very rigid sort of thing, it gives kind of a more modern look at here's some really wonderful modern prose and here's some prose that maybe isn't great and sort of rethinks the mold. Because I think it's really important that language evolves and that the rhetorical situation for our students does change based on who they are as the author and speaker. And so we have to find new ways of helping them express in an academic way without, again, cutting off their, cultural background. So I think this is maybe a book that will help me rethink some of that.
Awesome. Yes, listeners, you have a room full of readers here, so we've got a lot of books on our radar.
Room full of nerds.
We do other things.
We do.
But it is summer, and so there's a lot of reading.
Well, it's either books or movies.
Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot of those.
So some movies, maybe that's other things on our radar.
We'll have to. I was going to say.
Well, that might be a special edition because we are. Yeah, we're.
We might have to have some movies on our radar.
Maybe that's our next episode. Movies on our radar. We could have a whole podcast on movies. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So what's the nugget we're going to leave everybody with? I have one, but I know you like to do nuggets too, so I'll let you.
Well, I think I'm going to pass this nugget to you.
Okay.
So, yeah. What is the nugget you have? Yes.
I just basically have as a nugget that all of us can listen better and increase our understanding of culturally responsive teaching. We can recognize that many of our students have valuable and different experiences that can enrich the classroom and make them feel a part of an academic setting.
Yeah.
Regardless of what we teach.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Do you have a nugget?
No, I think that the nugget is to keep listening to this podcast because I think you all have such wonderful insights.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, that's all we have for today. So I'm Tanisha.
I'm Beth.
And I'm Karen.
And thank you so much for joining us today on Two Profs and a Pod. We hope that you'll join us the next time.